government has initiated a consultation process for formulation of a new national science, technology and innovation policy. The Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India and the Department of Science and Technology have jointly initiated a decentralized, bottom-up and inclusive process for the formulation of the new policy. The fifth S&T policy of the country is being formulated at a crucial juncture when India and the world are tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the need and formulation of a new science, technology and innovation policy. Joining me on the program today are Professor Ashutosh Sharma, Secretary, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Also with us, Professor V. Ram Gopal Rao, Director, Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and Sanjay Naik, Chairman, Science and Technology Committee, FICCI. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor Sharma, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze why is there a need for a new STI policy?
Good morning, Frank, and indeed good morning to all who are listening us. Why do we need a new policy? Well, the future is coming at us at faster and faster rate. Even 10 years ago, we could not have anticipated the challenges of science, technology, and innovation that we face today and that we would be facing for all future. Just for example, if we are looking at sustainable development goals for which science, technology, and innovation is a strong pillar, if you're looking at the rise of intelligent machines, artificial intelligence, which is going to have very far-reaching impact on everything that we do, the whole society. We are looking at the rise of antimicrobial resistance, electric mobility, clean energy, water, health, what have you. Now, of course, it's not only about the challenges of the future, but also how we do our business. So, for example, we have lots of strength in our R&D, in our human resources, in our markets, in our youth, demographic dividend. All of those are our strengths. How do we bring them out? In other words, how do we build on these foundational strengths and create a knowledge network, create a knowledge ecosystem which is seamless, which is end-to-end. So you start with R&D, lots of strengths, you have design, you have institutions like IITs here, great people. In fact, most of the multinationals have their second biggest design center in India, but it's not doing that much for India. We are number 3 in the world in number of scientific publications. So that's our strength. But now we need to connect that strength to all the other stakeholders, which means that all the knowledge generating systems have to be connected with knowledge consuming systems like industry, society, everybody on the whole. So right from education to preparing people for R&D, to design, to prototyping, to startups, to industry, to market, to society. So that basically is an overarching goal for the policy, to bring out our latent strength, to build on them and do it together with all the other stakeholders of the society. Also, Atmanirbhar Bharat, you see, what is Atmanirbhar Bharat and how do you actually get there? And clearly, together with policies, science, technology, and innovation is a basic pillar on which this is going to be built. So all of this is what requires that we have a policy. Not only do we have a policy which is static, but in fact, we're even thinking about policy for policy. What that means is that do we need a dynamic policy, for example, which means we don't just revisit it as a ritual once in 10 years. Science technology doesn't wait for our 10 years. It just keeps moving on forward with the speed. So we need to make course corrections if required every year. And of course, the pandemic has shown us that. It has shown us what our weaknesses are. It has also shown us what our strengths are and what kind of processes would have to be in place in order to move with the speed and scale. So of course, we can talk a lot more, a whole lot of other things, but we get to other friends who have joined us today.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you for summing that up for us, Professor Sharma, and telling us why we need a policy. Let's now get into recommendations and inputs really as far as various stakeholders are concerned. Let me bring in Sanjay Nayak first to get a perspective really as to what the industry is looking for in a new SID policy.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. First of all, as Professor Ashutosh said, this is a tremendous opportunity for India to really use science and technology as a foundation to leapfrog. And when I say leapfrog, not just in terms of the aspects of science and technology that we all easily measure in terms of research paper or publications, but leapfrog really in terms of economic impact. So what I would like to see from an industry perspective is something actually quite simple. We put the end in mind first, and the end in mind is that science and technology needs to be used as a mechanism to empower our domestic industry to leapfrog and create significant economic impact and economic value addition for the country. So if we take that as end in mind, then we step back and say, okay, if the Indian industry has to become world class, for example, we talked about that we have a lot of R&D centers for global companies in India, but that is work for hire. Why can't India, with so much amount of talent, so much amount of R&D capabilities, create Indian products which can be not just sold for India but for the world? So to do that, what is required should be the guiding principle of the science and technology policy. So that's point number one that I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is, if you really see, there are three different aspects of how R&D and science and technology comes in terms of the economic impact, because a lot of industries today are getting converged. For example, semiconductor, electronics, telecom, these are no longer tangential industries. These are core industries. These are as core as steel was or cement was 50 years back, because everything that we do has a telecom element to it. Everything that we do has an electronics element. So if we are going to take these as the knowledge-driven industry, which is where the next, this century is going to be leading us, we've got to understand the needs of that industry. The needs of that industry are very different than the R&D requirement of, for example, a steel industry. So here what is needed is really we need to create our own technology, our own capabilities. Because logically, think about it this way: if a foreign company invests $10 billion in doing fundamental research in artificial intelligence or building some kind of a telecom product or a semiconductor chip, you realistically believe they are going to do a transfer of technology to Indian company at 2% royalty? Of course, it's not going to do. So the whole model of transfer of technology should be only used for mature technologies where there is no need for us to reinvent the wheel. So if you take the R&D policy or the new science technology policy, we could break it up into two buckets. Bucket one, which we have to build self-sufficient, our own capabilities, because this foundation will take us for the next 50 years. Second set of things which we can easily acquire from abroad, and whenever there's a financial crisis in the world, it's an opportunity to acquire assets, IPR, patent, knowledge transfer at very, very attractive rate. So that's the second thing we should do. So if we can do those two things together, we are creating the right foundation. And then the last part, which Dr. Ashutosh also touched upon, is government has a very important role to play in the policy thing. So the policy angle that the industry is looking at is only a few things. One is very easy to articulate in terms of tax benefits. So there used to be 150%, 200% tax benefit. I think we should, of course, reinstate that. So that's the easy part. I think we should have some kind of a R&D cess of 1 or 2%, which will basically create the pool of R&D money that the company needs to fund such science and technology effort. Because without a self-sustaining mechanism for the next 3 years, we don't have enough money, because we cannot be doing suboptimal funding in all of those things. So that's number one part. Second aspect, which is a little bit more trickier, is market access. India's biggest strength beyond people is our large market. So far, for a variety of reasons, we gave up this market without requiring anything. So I think a value addition based market linkage, where some Indian company or a foreign company adds higher value add, higher economic impacts, get easier access to market. Someone who's a trader has to maybe face tariff barriers. So I think a market access control, funding control, and a favorable disposition in terms of the culture of R&D is needed for industry to really become vibrant and go ahead. I'll probably pause right now, and then during the conversation we'll have more topics.
Absolutely. We'll come back, of course, and touch upon various aspects as well ahead in the program. But before that, let me go across to Professor Rao now, who's been patiently listening to the two other panelists on the program. Professor Rao, as an academician, what is your take on the STI policy? What would you like to see being incorporated? Let's not forget that this is the 5th policy that we are having on science and technology. So what are your inputs?
I think when you talk about science, technology and innovation policy, I think there are basically 3 things that we are talking about. The science part of it, I think India, I would like to believe, is doing pretty well in science. I think you give us more money, we can generate more knowledge. And I think, but the impactful kind of a science probably is something that we need to aspire to. But even that will happen. Out of all that we are doing now, will come that impact. I think it's just a matter of time. But when it comes to technology, I think technology is basically application of this scientific knowledge for boosting the productivity or for building machines and all of that. That is the role of industry. And that is again where the academia industry collaborations become very important. And because we lack that sort of an interaction between academia and industry in this country, I think all the science that we do getting converted to technology often takes a back seat, and we keep complaining nothing much is happening and that sort of a thing. So therefore we need to strengthen that ecosystem, and that is important. Now the innovation part of is basically from inception to impact. I think that is how I would define innovation. And the innovation part of it is where we can do better. I think startups are playing a big role. Until now, for example, for an academic institution to show impact, the only way was to work with an industry. I think that was a very well established kind of a mechanism. But even after so many years, we are still struggling to bring industry to the campuses and to make them interested in what we are doing and all of that. But I think the startups have now bridged that gap to a very large extent. For example, a place like IIT Delhi, now I see our future in our startups. And there are 100 startups now trying to take these technologies from faculty members, or faculty members starting their own companies now with their PhD students. I think that is where I see the future for the country. To me, when we talk of future of India, the future of India is present in our academic institutions. What the students that we have, these are the people who are going to build the future for the country. And I see that the science, the SDIP policy needs to, focus and do a few things right. I think we have built these good quality institutions in the country. The ecosystem exists now for doing good science, but I think the next step is to go to that next level. I think to me, the Corona and China, these are our opportunities. I think the problems that China is now facing is where the advantages for India lie. And the Corona has also taught us now in a way what academic institutions in this country can actually do in times of need. I think, but this has to become a normal process. If you look at even a place like South Korea, how did South Korea suddenly become a global leader in so many technologies? I was recently reading some reports. I think the South Korean war, which took place in 50s, actually laid the foundation for South Korea to go to that next level. I think for India, probably, I think the opportunity is now. I think what the world is going through, the turmoil that has caused now, is an opportunity for India. If you can cash in to a proper STIP policy, I think India can be a world leader in the next 30 to 40 years.
Okay, this is a golden opportunity is what all the 3 panelists are suggesting, and we really need to step up and turn the tragedy into something positive and put our best foot forward. Okay, talking about best way foot forward, let's talk about the process now and the timelines really. Professor Sharma, what is the kind of timeline we are looking at as far as the formulation of the policy is concerned, and what is the process going to be like going forward?
Yeah, so while timeline is always yesterday, so it's going to be very, very quick, but it does not mean that this is going to short circuit any of the consultative processes, which are very important. Now, 2 of our guests here, Professor Ram Gopal Rao and Mr. Sanjay Nayak, they told us something very important. So Mr. Sanjay Nayak coming from the perspective of industry, Professor Ram Gopal Rao coming from the perspective of academia, but you can see both of them are very keen to work with each other. And this is basically what has to be captured. Essentially, if I simplify it conceptually, I say we have to figure out a way by which Lakshmi and Saraswati are working together, being comfortable with each other. they have a respect for each other, and they see the value that the other brings, right? So this is the major focus of our policy. Indeed, what both the gentlemen said, and then leading up to Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, about the consultative process, you see, it's very important to recognize that this is going to be a very holistic policy, which means the stakeholder consultation, both with experts and with bottom-up grassroots. Both of these processes are equally important, and they do capture the aspirations of a very large segment of our population which gets affected by the policy. So what are the, for example, just look at very quickly some of the major components of the policy. It's about financing. How do you finance R&D, startups, innovation, reaching out? What is the role of industry in it? What is the role of government in it? It's about capacity building. It's about institutions and infrastructure. It's about making technology, converting science into technology. It was pointed out that we also need to enhance the profoundness and quality of our basic research, but also the relevance of the applied research. Equity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion are very important aspects. Remember, not all great ideas come only from PhDs. Whole lot of them come from farmers because they know what their problems are, and they even might have ideas about good solutions that work. But we need to formalize that, and we say, how is it going to be scaled up? So it's about diversity. Certainly, we have very low representation of women. Geographic representation is not always very balanced. About socioeconomic strata, and all of that. So this is very, very important, because if 50% of society has no role models in science and technology, then we are running short on options. Definitely, because it cannot be a grassroots movement. Then it's about governance, it's about industry, it's about scientific communication or science communication at different levels, even reaching out to society, which is very weak right now. It's about research processes, about innovation, entrepreneurship. It's about access to our resources. It's about democratization of knowledge and science as well. So it's not just one end is so-called elite science. The other end is how do we have access, participation, democratization, so every little young person in a school is fired up, is excited about what the future holds, and understands the value of science and technology. It's about innovation and entrepreneurship and about startups, as was pointed out by Professor Rao, but not just startups which are only high-tech in an IITs, which is certainly a very good segment. But think about if you are going to make the number of startups 10x of what we have now, or even 100x. You need a different mechanism to be able to do that. And so the policy would look at that. It's about different sectors. It was pointed out there are growth sectors. There are sectors wherein we can make very rapid strides. People often use the word leapfrog, but I rather say I don't really like frogs that much anymore. So something about pole vaulting, right? So we really get into that mode and say, hey, we will do it, right? International connects, very important, right? So now you just think about international connects. How do we leverage those? Was pointed out. The different sectors, policy regarding governance and implementation is very important, right? So it's not policy which is a wish list. It must have actionable, implementable, practical, pragmatic ideas, and we must know who is going to be actually doing all of this, right? So now this consultative process is very extensive. There are so many different groups which are being consulted, which you may call expert consultation. Once we have a skeleton for which means, what are the major issues and what you different options and so on. We are going to put it up for public consultation. There are going to be 2 different public consultations of massive kind, wherein we expect that tens of lakhs of people would actually be able to participate in this process and give their inputs. Now, see, so you said, what is the timeline? I know that I have not answered that question. So the timeline I said is yesterday, and it's certainly by the end of this year, we would do everything possible to make it happen.
Okay. All right. So Sanjay, let me bring in another aspect now. We keep talking about ease of doing business and how well India has done really as far as the ease of doing business ranking is concerned. How about ease of doing research?
So, Bhativ, so let's talk of this problem from two different angles. Does the capability exist, in the sense, do we have the talent within the country to build world-class, whatever, world-class papers if you want to publish, crack a very complex problem, or build a very innovative product? So the answer is yes. So we have the capabilities, we have the talent pool within the country in terms of doing all this science technology leading to innovation. Second thing is it actually happening, and is it happening enough? And the answer is no. And the reason is, if you really see, and I broadly, from a tech angle, I would just like to simplify. I mean, I'm sure the examples could be in other domains. From a tech angle, if you really see even the last 25 years or 30 years of India's progress on a global basis in terms of a technology superpower, we've been very good at solving a problem that someone else gives to us. So we are becoming a very good destination for outsourcing, whether it is for services companies, whether it is R&D centers, but we have not become a very good place in the world for making our own products. So we figuring out what the problems to be solved, solving it hopefully better than anybody else in the world, and then actually replicating that success to the world. So if I take that aspect of the problem solving or the capabilities, I think there's a lot to be done. So in a very simple way, we need a lot more deep technology companies which take ideas and turn it into executable business, which is impactful, whether it is for agriculture, whether it is for transportation, whether it is for, whatever other societal problem that we have to solve. So I think that culture is not yet there. Maybe there are not too many success stories of India, even though we are talking about a lot of startups. I mean, there seems to be a lot more gravitation of startups on a B2C, business to consumer kind of a thing, which are replication of how a problem has been solved in some other part of the world, and we are having a quote-unquote Indian version of it. So I really think there is still a need, and there's a gap where the industry needs to step up and actually create deeper technology companies with larger impact and a lasting impact in terms of how we would add to the economic value chain in the country.
I like the fact that you admitted that the industry needs to step up, because over the years, we've only seen the industry asking for more and more from the government and saying, this needs to be done and that needs to be done. I think it starts first by accepting that, you yourself need to do more. So thank you. And for saying it as it should be said. All right. So Professor Rao, talking about all stakeholders now, how do we bridge the gap between all the stakeholders and ensure that everybody comes together as one? Say, for instance, you were giving the example of industry and academia. How do we ensure we do that all stakeholders come together as one?
I think, to me, academia has a bigger role to play in that. I think you put government and industry in a room, there is a lot of distrust. They don't trust really each other. But industry doesn't mind working with academia. Neither is government averse to working with academia. I think academia should play that role of bringing industry and government together, in developing the future policies and all of that. I think we have a major role to play. But also for academia, I think, to me, places like IITs, we need to put innovation ahead of everything else. I think, once you put innovation ahead of everything else, the science and technology will also go hand in hand so that you innovate. To me, innovation, as I said, is inception to impact, something which becomes impactful. It need not always be money kind of a thing. When you talk about impact can be in so many different ways. And therefore, if you put innovation ahead of everything else, then the science and technology will basically become the pillars on which the innovation will stand. And then these institutions now, seen as impactful, I think everybody will gravitate towards these institutions, and that is how the future of the India will be built. I think that is where we need to turn around our education models. At a place like IIT Delhi, for example, now how does innovation happen? Our biggest challenge in this country for innovation in academic institutions is our institutions have become very homogeneous. When will innovation happen? When unlike minds come together, when people who think very differently talk to each other, that is when innovation will happen. And unfortunately, in our institutions, whether it is, the admission processes or our selection of faculty, we have become so stereotyped. We have stereotyped almost everything in our institutions, because in the process of dealing with numbers, we tend to come up with rules, and the moment you come up with rules, then the bureaucratic processes enter, and that way everything will get streamlined, everything looks fine. But I think that is what is now lacking in our academic institutions. And how do we bring these unlike minds together on our campuses? To me, unlike minds are people with different attitudes. That is where the industry, people working with academia, I think their attitudes are very different. Even if you give them the same problem, they will look very differently. They will think very differently. I think these unlike minds, whether in terms of attitudes or even in terms of cultures, you can say India is a very diverse culture and all that, but unfortunately, whether it is a student from Assam or a student from Telangana, they all go through the same CBSE exam, they all go through the same textbooks, and they all take the same examinations. By the time they come to our IITs, they all think alike, they all behave alike. I think that is again we have lost even on the cultural diversity that this country has. So therefore, diversity in terms of cultures and even diversity in terms of disciplines. That is again the multidisciplinary kind of research becomes very important. So I think this fragmented higher education system, for management you have different schools, for science you have different schools, for engineering you have different schools, I think that is what is now causing the lack of innovation in our academic system. I think we need to now take a more cohesive approach as we move forward. I think, but that is where innovation we need to put ahead, so that all of these things can happen and then lead to something which is impactful for the country. And that way we become the world leaders in some of these areas.
I think that's a very, very valid and a very important point that you've made. I hope that we actually take heed to this and do something about it, because we need to innovate really from a young age, and we need to consider those formative years as well, because those are crucial and very, very important. Time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists. I've got 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to ask you to be very brief in 30 seconds each. The best way forward, starting first with you, Professor Sharma.
Okay, 30 seconds is a tough call, but anyways, what Mr. Nayak said, I would elaborate on that, saying, look, we need to we need to marry the push of academia with the pull of industry. Second thing is what Professor Rao said, it's about different people talking to each other, being interdisciplinary, being multidisciplinary, being not disciplinary, but in problem-solving mode. But I would submit to him, not one of his departments will actually recruit a faculty member who has a multidisciplinary background. I guarantee you this. I know this, right? So these are the changes, hard changes in our culture that we would have to bring in. So I close there.
Okay, all right, Sanjay.
Just two I would say expectations in terms of what I think this initiative should yield into. Number one, I think it should be outcome based. So I think we as an industry and the government as a country, we should really have a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and maybe 10-year deliverable in terms of what we expect this policy to make an impact. So that's point number one. Number two is really we need to think of it slightly different in a structural form. So rather than trying to solve all the problems, and I like what Professor Ashutosh said earlier, it's a policy of policies. So at this point in time, let's pick maybe 10 areas which are very important for the country from a R&D and science and technology angle, and go whole hog from research to innovation to impact to industry to economic value add. And let's pick 10 areas as missions and actually deliver on those is what I would suggest would be a good way to really make an impact in the time period that we have.
All right, and Professor Rao, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
Yeah, I think as Professor Sharma said, there are challenges, but at least we have started now at IIT Delhi, a school for interdisciplinary research. We are now looking at recruiting biologists in electrical departments. I think things are changing, but I think there are still challenges. I agree with him. And but I think to me, when I talk about educational institutions, bringing unlike minds is one thing which is very important. Putting innovation ahead of everything else is important, and also exposing our students to these technology platforms very early on. I call these technology platforms 5 T's: the information technology, then came the biotechnology, the nanotechnology, the cognitive technologies, and quantum technologies. I call it IT, BT, NT, CT, QT. I think that is where the next 20 years is going to be. And if you look at the 50 years of our span now, I think these are the 5 technologies which are going to rule the world, and that is where we need to be. So therefore, expose them to these technology platforms and then connect our students and faculty to societal problems through crowdsourcing kind of models. And the final thing is the delivery mechanism. I think even if you develop something, how do you deliver it? Startups can play a big role in that. So I think to me, from R&D to me is research and development to relevance and delivery. I think if you can make our institutions now realize that R&D is relevance and delivery, this country will look very different, I think, through contributions from our academic institutions.
Absolutely. All right, then on that note, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Coming out of this discussion is that changing times and technology call for a new and improved policy that is abreast with the times. Science and technology needs to be used as a means to help our industries and companies, thereby helping the economy on the whole. Inception to impact. That's how we need to look at innovation. Industry needs